Good morning, y'all. Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. I'm Jess, and today is garden tour day. We actually missed last week. I am not 100% sure which week this is. 4, I think, but we missed last week. Whichever week this is, it's June the 9th today, which means kind of cool. Last year, I did my first garden tour of the season on this weekend, and so it's kind of neat now to have the reference to be able to go back and look then at where the garden was and where it is now. So let's go take a look at it. There's not just a whole lot going on over here on this side of things. My elephant ears are getting really large and beautiful. That's nice. And all of this stuff is kind of settling in. My pepper plants just struggled so much. I moved them out here and have planted several of them. I'm hoping they'll still get a little bigger. Check out these green stalks filling out. Aren't those pretty? Look at this. An exotic cat plant growing well in the greenhouse. This first bit of the bed is kind of a wily space with this lettuce and radishes, and that should be replanted here before too long. Here are the Tanya's pink potted beans, and I am picking from these plants now, as you can see here. I've got quite a few to come through and pick in here. We have a big family, and so it takes more than a handful of beans to make an actual side dish for our family. So what I do this time of year, whenever things are just kind of starting to peter in, I put like a big gallon bag in my fridge or a container and pick the handfuls that I get every day and put it in there. And then once I have enough to do something with, I'll actually cook them. And I think we'll be eating green beans today for the first time this season because they're all finally really starting to steadily come in. As you can see, these plants are pretty heavy laden, and look at that. That's such a good example of what Tanya's pink pod bean looks like. It's a really pretty pink bean. Sometimes when they're getting a little more sun, they look slightly more pink than that, but I like to pick them young. They can get more pink. They also get a little tougher the bigger they get. So this is when I like to pick them, when they look like this. And then I've also got the purple potted here on this trellis, and they have been really, really prolific. I'm picking a lot of these every day. Pole beans get so big so quickly. I did not pick yesterday, and as you can see, like, these are larger than I actually like for them to be. I like them really young, but that's what one day extra growth does. I'm not gonna pick beans right now. I could so get carried away with that. There's something about picking beans to me that is just like very therapeutic. Picking anything, but like stuff that you have to like really kind of search for, I don't know what that is, but I like coming out here and picking those in the morning. And I have quite a few to pick, but I want to use the time that I have good light to make a video, not pick beans. Here are the pepper plants and nasturtiums. Here, the battle over the eggplants with the flea beetles rages on. Obviously, they've enjoyed themselves quite a bit of the eggplants, but the plants are still alive, so that's good. All these peppers are just starting to fill out nicely. I'm feeling pretty good about that. This is Alaska Red Shades Nasturtium, which is a variegated nasturtium. Obviously, there are a lot of flowers on these plants that we have not eaten. We've been putting them on salads, but there's just only so many of those things you can eat. I've also seen where people use nasturtium flowers for decorations on like cookies. I think that it could potentially be really good on ice cream. That's what I was kind of thinking, because they do have that kind of spicy horseradish kick. And I was thinking of doing like a homemade ice cream with maybe some cajeta, which is like a pepper spicy caramel goat cheese caramel sauce. And I was thinking that those might be kind of good with that flavor pairing, but I have not done that yet. Here, kind of tucked down behind these bean plants. Let's put this little guy back where he goes. These are calendulas. just about to open up their flowers. It's been so wet that a lot of my plants have like yucky spots on their leaves, but for the most part they're still healthy and they're still doing okay. You see here I've got some little peppers coming in. These okra should be producing before too long. This is a old Alabama red variety, and then that's actually a Clemson spineless on the end because the Alabama ones didn't come up as well as I'd hoped, so I stuck another one down there. Now the other day on the vlog I had Ezra help me transplant these melons, and as you can see they're struggling pretty hard. Melons don't like to get moved around, and I was aware of that transplanting them, that they were pretty established plants and I was probably going to upset them pretty badly moving them, but we were thinning and we were going to throw them out anyway, so I thought, well, we'll give it a shot to move them over here. And they look pretty puny, but I think that they'll pull through. They're not dead, they're just sad. So there's this moment where the sun comes for just enough over the trees to like kiss the tops of the garden. Isn't that beautiful? So all of this space here that's bare is now sowed. Actually, little Benjamin and I came out the other day and we did a vlog while we did this, but we sowed so many seeds just all over all the bare spaces. We filled up with something, all kinds of things. Didn't mark anything. I do have a list of what seeds we use, so if I need to like nail down a variety, I'll be able to. But yeah, so this is going to be pretty interesting. I've never done that before. I've never relinquished control enough to put anything in the garden that I didn't know exactly what it was and where it was. So it's a little bit exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking. I'm like, I don't know what it's going to look like. I hope stuff comes up. I hope it does well. I have no idea. So hopefully in the next few weeks we're going to have some fun guessing games in our garden doors. Now, all of these are pepper plants, which actually I had these cole crops in the middle, like cold weather greens that had gotten really large, and they'd kind of forced these pepper plants up tall and kind of leggy, and so I pulled the cole crops out as they started to bolt. And I'm going to be looking into how to prune these plants to make them a little bushier because they are little puny guys right now. First, here's the beans from the other side. All that's here now are these purple potted beans. However, in all of these spaces there are rattlesnake pole beans sown, and they'll come up here and fill the spaces in, which is nice that this trellis won't be naked this year. Now here is the Keuka melon making its way on up the trellis, and I've got some young ones that I resowed. I've had such a hard time direct sowing melons this year because the pests have just been really relentless. Same thing on the other side. I've got one that's a little more established and then some little babies coming up. Oh, look at this. I'm about to have a little calendula open up probably by this evening. That's gonna be pretty. We need to talk about the tomatoes. This has been, it's been my hardest year of gardening, circumstantially, that I've ever experienced. I haven't been gardening a super long time. Like, it's not like people who can, you know, say that they've been doing this for literal decades. But personally, just in my short experience in gardening, I've never had a year where more circumstances negatively were stacked against me. And I've been talking to other people who garden and have been gardening for a lot longer than I have, and they've agreed that this has just been a really, really hard year. It's been very wet, but also very, very hot, which means incredibly humid. And it was such a mild winter that pests that usually don't show up until like mid-June were out at the beginning of May. And it's just been, because of those things, just very circumstantially difficult in the garden, things that you really have to contend against. So I am now seeing some sickness show up on my tomato leaves that I usually don't see until middle of July. And it's the bottom leaves, which it's fairly typical for bottom leaves to get kind of yucky because they're the ones getting the splashback when it does rain from the soil. And so this isn't that big of a deal. I don't like to see this early, but I'm not afraid. I'm not going to freak out. What I am going to do is I'm going to come through and re-stake up all my plants, because after all of this rain, a lot of them have branches that are falling over again, and that's not good, because then I've got branches touching the ground from the top of the plant, which is not good. I'm going to come through and prune the bottom leaves off of all of these plants. That's something that I've shared before. You definitely want to keep the bottom leaves up, and as the plant grows, you prune more off the bottom. And actually, Gary from the Rustic Garden has a video, he actually has a couple of videos out about some spray mixes that he makes with baking soda and aspirin and hydrogen peroxide to help fight tomato disease. And I will be mixing that up today and spraying that on these plants. I'll link those videos down below so you guys can check those out. And if something happened where I did not get my tomatoes, I would be one sad gardener. See, I've got a lot of this stuff going on. Big branches falling over. Here's the burning banana bed with peppers and banana trees. And I just peeked something that I'm excited to see. Look. How cool is that? I need to get some snips to cut it off. I planted these zinnias hoping that they would poke out like this. Well, this plant's looking good. This is the Glacier Custard Squash. I'm probably saying that wrong. Sometimes whenever I'm actually seed shopping and I see something that I really want to grow, but it has like a really difficult to pronounce name, I'm like, because I definitely am going to have to pronounce that in front of thousands of people, so probably get it wrong. The custard squash. It's very similar to a patty pan, but it's like a little fatter and the edge is a little more frilly. As you can see on that one that's almost ready. I'll probably pick that for dinner tonight. Super excited about that. Got more squash here. That one has not put off very much yet. I've been noticing some pollination issues. So when you have a squash plant and you notice that you've got squash looking like this, what typically is going on here is that this little fruit was very poorly pollinated. And that's another one of those difficult circumstances this year. Now, we live in the middle of the woods. I have never, in my experience of gardening out here where we are now, ever had a shortage of pollinators. Ever. That's never been a problem. I had to look up what was going on with my squash this year because I've never seen that before. I've never had to hand pollinate. I'm getting all of these wonky shaped squash with, that are kind of like softening off at the ends. And I'm like, what is going on? And I looked it up and I was like, poor pollinators. Surely that's not the issue. So I started coming out here and looking, and I see very, very few bees, which is bizarre. And we live out in the county. There's nobody coming down and spraying, unless like an individual around here sprayed, but I don't know who would have done that. A friend of ours that lived around the corner that kept bees, they moved. So there's no bees there anymore. And if maybe some other people in the area that used to keep bees got out of it, but I actually haven't seen a single honeybee in my garden since I started to notice. I've seen bumblebees, but we are getting bees. We'll actually have them in this week, I believe. That's not our new animal. Somebody was like, oh, is that the new animal? That is not what we've been clearing our woods for. That is something else. With the bees were something we were already going to get. And we have some beekeeper friends that are helping us put in some hives. So my pollinator issue is almost over. Once we have our bees here, obviously the garden will be pollinated just fine. But in the meantime, I'm probably gonna get a paintbrush and hand pollinate these squash so that I don't have to watch any more squash shrivel up and die. Here next to my sad squash plant are some purple dove bush beans, which I'll also be picking today. I've been picking on these this week. I've got quite a few. And here on the other side in this bed, this okra is starting to come up. Oh, look at that wormy. Little baby blossom, so we'll have stuff on these soon. Someone asked recently, they noticed the different rocks in the garden, and I've got some that are like solid orange in different colors, and people were asking if they were eggs or what the deal was. These are just river rocks that my kids painted. My mom did that with them one time as like a project. What a happy thing. Welcome to the garden, little guy. Y'all will recall I had a mystery plant that I thought might be borage. You all agreed that it definitely was, and you were right. Here it is. This is a volunteer borage that has now gotten huge. It's just filling out this whole area of the bed. Here are some volunteer zinnias that came up from last year, and this may be one of my favorite zinnias that I've had. Look how pretty that is. It's like perfectly sherbet pink. I really like that one. I would have never said that my favorite flower was a zinnia, ever. I've always said peonies or ranunculus. I love sunflowers, but I kind of realized the other day in sowing my garden, as the zinnias started to come up, I found myself, when we were doing like the willy-nilly sowing, I found myself going and grabbing even more zinnia seeds. And as I was poking them in here and there, because they just grow so happy. They get so big, they are very forgiving, and you can put one little seed in just an area that you've got a small space and it'll just fill right up with happy flowers. And Kitten George just ran through here like a madman. But yeah, I was like, I really like zinnias. It's really like shaping up to be one of my favorites. And I kind of had to pull myself back and be like, okay, Jess, you have to grow food in your garden. You can't just grow this massive garden full of zinnias. First of all, let's address this. These sunflowers are getting so big. I've got one that's like well taller than me, and a few of the other ones are getting really close. We're about equal. They'll be much taller than me just in the next week, so that's pretty cool. And here on the trellis next to the sunflowers, right before the frost was over, Daniel was here and we came and we sowed Keuka Melons on this trellis, and they didn't come up and they didn't come up and they didn't come up, so I came and I sowed other cucumbers on the trellis. And then I realized a little while ago that I did actually have a couple of Keuka Melons. Now that one I can still move. This one I'm going to leave here. So this trellis is going to kind of end up mixed with both. I'll move that one over to the area where I've actually got Keuka Melons growing. These are also cucumbers though, and on this side there are cucumber plants starting to grab hold and starting to set little tiny fruits. Nasturtium has gone wild. Oh, hey little ladybug friend. I'm glad to see you here. Again, there's only so many flowers we can eat, but this plant is just covered in them. Oh my gosh, I just saw something. Okay, we gotta take a detour. We were gonna finish looking at that bed, but I just looked over here and something caught my eye. Oh my gosh. That is the first ripening tomato in the garden this year. I really hoped that it would be this week, because last year, like I said, it was this weekend last year that I did my first garden tour. And in that first garden tour, I was like, well, we haven't had any ripe tomatoes yet, but I'm hoping it'll be this, in the next couple weeks. And I did that tour on the 6th, and it was just a few days later that I had my first ripe tomato. By the next weekend, we were having multiple ripe cherry tomatoes. And so I've been kind of like, it should be any day now that I should see something start to blush. And this honey drop cherry is definitely changing colors. It's not there yet, and I definitely want to give it time to fully turn so I can enjoy it in all its glory, but that is exciting to see. Makes me wonder if there are any more that are going to be close to turning, because usually once they start, I don't see anything. Honey drop is a stabilized hybrid. That's like a more recently developed variety, and it's open pollinated. You can save the seeds, but maybe that's why it is early to the show. These Brad's Atomic grapes may be the next ones. They're still pretty hard. When it comes to these varieties like Brad's Atomic Grape and some of the ones that have a lot of green in them or like weird colors, like Brad's Atomic Grape ends up having like streaks of like orange and red and then purple shoulders, and sometimes it stays a little green. I always have to squeeze them, and like with these I'll just give them a gentle squeeze to see how close they are. If you're growing any green tomatoes, make sure that you are checking them by squeezing them, not just by looking at them, because they're not going to pop out at you. They're not going to like stand out from the foliage. Like I spotted that ripening honey drop from like 2 beds away. I mean, I have an eagle eye for ripening tomatoes, but yeah, with these Brad's Atomic Grape, these may be next, but I don't know. It's hard to tell by their color. Look at it. Can you even see that? I seriously didn't spot that from like all the way over there. That little dot of orange down there. Here are peppers, ground cherries. I've got some different seeds sowed in here in this space, and then once this stuff comes up, this bed is going to get mulched. My hope is to get the rest of the garden mulched this week, but I sowed all those seeds, so I'm going to wait until they start coming up. And that kind of stinks because without the mulch down, I'm having to weed a lot more. Weeds come up a lot faster, but I do want to give those seeds an opportunity to germinate. And sometimes they can get through the mulch, but just fine, no problem. But if it rains really heavily and that mulch gets kind of compacted down, I just don't want to risk that being an issue. Oh look, there are my boys. Hey guys! Hey, handsome man. Maverick's looking at me. So I figured out that I've been actually saying this melon's name wrong. I've been saying Kahu. It's actually Kaho. K-A-H-O is what it is. I looked it up yesterday because I couldn't remember what it was exactly, and I wanted to make sure. So that one's coming along. And here we have lemon squash. And you can see here, these are just starting to put off some fruit. Got lots of little baby squashes that haven't opened blossoms yet. And I'm watching these, making sure I might come out and do some hand pollinating on these before the bees get here. So this bed is actually mostly still empty. I got some plants yesterday, and I'm going to put some roselle in here. Many of you had suggested that, and I had it, but I hadn't started it from seed, and so I was like, well, I guess I'll just grow it next year. But then at the conference yesterday, she had roselle start, so I got 2 of those, and I'm going to put them in this bed. That's like a really big, pretty hibiscus relative. It's going to be beautiful in this bed, and you can make tea out of it. Hey, check this out on the fence here. And the wild blackberries are ready. Our roadsides are now covered with wild blackberries, and even just standing right here, right on the edge of my woods, I see just tons and tons of blackberries. So I'll be picking these this week as well. Here is the Ragosa Felina squash. I've started picking these. They are the red Swan Beans. I did double check. And they're really, really pretty. I've got a lot to pick, as you can see, just from missing one day. I first picked off these 2 days ago. The garlic is largely coming ready. Let's actually come down here to the end and then work our way back. There I've got Yamato long cucumbers, and all along this side are green beans, and they're not even flowering yet. Now this is the Rampicante squash that vines, and well, it's going a little wild. Coffee delivery man?
That's my job.
Thank you.
More often than not.
I love you. Look at the squash.
I guess I didn't get the memo.
Which is what?
Grow up.
One of its branches went up, and one's coming along here, and I don't know that there's anything I can do about it at this point without completely crowding it on that spot. Man, it got away from me fast. Oh well, there's not anything planted right here, so we'll just let it have its way, I guess. There are a few stages in my garden, and maybe yours is this way too. There's the spring, whenever I am so hopeful and so visionary and so excited. And there's the part where I am so meticulous in everything that I put in. It's in the perfect place. It's incredibly thought out. And that's about how half of the garden gets planted. Now, in years past, the second half of the garden would either get planted by any extra plants I have, and then there would be blank space. I just wouldn't finish planting it. This year, I didn't want to do that, so that's where the willy-nilly seed sowing came in, and I just filled up all the spaces. And then what happens is there's the first half of the harvest time where I am meticulous and everything gets pruned well, it gets tied up well, everything gets really picked in a timely manner, and it's just, it's the first half of the summer. But then there's this tipping point that happens, and it's usually about July, mid-July here, where the garden goes wild. And at the tipping point, it's the best I can do to just harvest everything. Things just go nuts, and that means if they grow off in a different direction, I just let them. There's no more trying to train anything to trellises. It's just like the wild garden season, and that lasts for about a month, where I'm just here for the ride. Now, the exception to that being a neat, orderly thing is that occasionally there are plants that they go rogue, and there's just not much I can do about it, and this squash plant may be one of those. Because essentially, I think what happened here is maybe 2 plants grew, and I missed it. I thought it was just 1. And so this one is growing all off in this direction, and I could try to twist it back onto the trellis, but I think that I would probably break it and hurt it, and it's not worth it. So it's gonna go a little wild. Maya just let the chickens out. We're actually getting 10 new chickens this week too, because we've had some predator issues lately, and our flock is pretty small. These were all very old, and so we're going to be getting 10 new ones, and that should keep us just fine in eggs. Here coming up is Malabar Spinach. That was one that you guys heavily suggested we try, and so I've given that a trellis. More nasturtiums, and these are cucumbers. So they'll be filling out and growing really nicely. Here's where I was saying how the weeds are just really relentless when there's no mulch. You can see there's quite a lot there, and we got a lot of mushrooms coming up too, which is a good thing to see in your garden. Mushrooms are just kind of a sign that things are going pretty normally. You won't see mushrooms in a garden typically that's not organically grown, because it's just a sign of soil health. So when I see mushrooms, I'm kind of just like, whatever. A lot of times I'll pick them out if they're kind of unsightly, but right now I'm leaving the weeds, so I'll leave the mushrooms too. That's a squash, and of course I will sow those throughout the summer, moving around the garden and putting new squash in, because we do have such a problem with squash bugs here that I just succession sow them to make sure that we always have squash. Here are more cucumbers. This beautiful lemon thyme. This looks so pretty. Purslane, which purslane is of course edible, and plenty of people plant that. It grows like bonkers here. It grows everywhere, so I pull it out of the garden beds. A weed is just a plant that is undesired at the place that it is, and so we could eat that purslane, and sometimes we do. Sometimes when I pull some of it out, I'll take some and eat it, but it just grows all over, so I don't want to give it garden bed space when I can just go pick it out of the backyard if I want it. This Love Lies Bleeding Amaranth sure is a beauty. And here are where my Keuka Melons are on purpose. You can see them kind of coming up there. I moved them out from the greenhouse, and I may move that other one that was on that other trellis over here. If you're growing Keuka Melons this year for the first time, they're also called Mexican sour gherkins, or I've seen them called mouse melons. Rest assured that they get a slow start. That's pretty typical. That's been my experience, and I've talked to a lot of other people that they just kind of take their time taking off, and then once they do, though, just like they grow like crazy. So if yours are just really puny little guys, don't stress. They'll catch up. Here are the more established okra plants, and they are giving pretty steady harvests of a few pods a day. At this point, it's still just okra snacks, but before too long, these guys will be covered up, and they'll be keeping me busy, as well as all the other okra that I've planted. And check that out. They grow so fast. Like, I checked them last night and didn't feel like these were ready to pick yet. And look, you can see there are several here. Same thing down here. You see those pods? Several of you have asked for video content of how to use okra. Up until this point, I've only had a few pieces at a time, but I will definitely share my handed down southern wisdom on how to cook okra, because I can cook some okra for sure. It's one of my favorite things to grow in the garden. Yesterday I was on a Q&A panel at that homesteading conference, and someone asked, they're like, if you just were gonna grow a few things to make you feel good about your garden, and they were asking for, here in the South. I don't know that okra grows quite as crazy well elsewhere, But here, I mean, it thrives on heat and neglect and poor soil. So, I mean, okra is one of those things that you can grow and feel really good about yourself as a gardener. This Hot Biscuits amaranth has been completely bug riddled the entire time I've had it. And I've not found what's doing it. I haven't picked a single bug off of this plant, but it has just been steadily covered in holes the entire time I've had it. And I haven't sprayed it with anything because I don't really care if it looks like this. I guess I could take some pride in things and be proactive, but I think it's neat looking. Here's some peppers. This is all sowed now. All of these spaces are filled in. Eggplants. And these guys seem to have prevailed the flea beetle attacks, and they have blossoms on them, so that's cool. Here are the snake beans, and behind them some zinnias, which I sowed ridiculously close together, and I don't know why I did that. This is kind of a cool like illustration though. If you'll see, these zinnias are just like, I mean, I think I may have put like seriously a whole pack in right here. I don't know why I did this. I can't remember. I know I did it though. Ben was helping me. That maybe that's what happened here. I don't know. But you can see these zinnias look really small. Whereas here, now this is a different variety of zinnia. So that's going to have some factor in it, but spacing really matters. Look how big these are and how big these plants are. Now these are sowed like 6 to 8 inches apart in here. And now the plants are starting to fill out and they get multiple stems and they look really full, but that's not a lot of plants. Whereas over here on the ones that are sowed really thickly, these are not going to get as tall and the blooms are not going to get nearly as big. And like I said, the variety can have some factor in that. It kind of makes me want to do an experiment and plant the same variety side by side, some much further spaced and some really close. But I've had a lot of people ask me, they're like, I've never had my zinnias get as tall and full as yours. And my first guess on that would probably be that they need to be spaced further apart. Last year, in my garden tours, if you'll recall, if you've seen those, I had big zinnia patches, and most of those, even though they were taking up like sometimes like a 2 by 4 foot space, that was like 6 or 7 seeds in that space, just spaced out really well and allowed to completely fill out. And they were getting as tall as, you know, me standing next to the raised bed. So really filling out. And that's like that with most plants. If you will give them the space to fill out, you're going to get larger plants. But if you plant them really close together, they're going to be smaller. And sometimes you want to do that on purpose. You can plant sunflowers close together and just have them just the right height to cut and put on your kitchen table. Whereas if you give them a lot of space, they might get larger. Again, it matters the variety, but even, you know, any variety, when you plant it closer together, it's going to be smaller and you give it more space. It'll fill out to the size that it is like allowed to max out as. Look at these tomatoes. Little rebels coming over here. Wow, this one is all the way up to the top of that trellis once I tie it up there. I can't believe the garden is as big as it is. We're at this point. I wait for it all year. Look at the Multiflora Berry Crazies cherry. That was super cool looking. Here's something that'll happen with your tomato plants. Now, this is just a branch that's fallen over here on the backside. And look, this guy is desperately trying to grow some more roots. And if I allowed this to grow along the ground, this whole branch would just root right on the ground. Now I'm going to pick it up and tie it up so that this plant doesn't get sickly. But isn't that interesting looking? Got some more melons here. Oh, here I put in some Ozark Razorback cowpeas. And I didn't get great germination on these. Just got some spaces here where they didn't quite come in, and that could have been for a number of reasons. We had a lot of rain after I sowed them. More succession sowed squash. These are just like a yellow crookneck. And here, my Romanian white cucumbers, which I'm really excited about. And on the end here, more okra. So these beds are pretty uneventful right now. The tomatoes over there are all looking good. They need a little work, like I said, just like the rest of them, tying up, pruning. This is all sowed with seeds that Benjamin and I sowed. That, I'm pretty sure, is a borage coming up. It's going to let it. That's holy basil. And here are some pepper plants. purple basil, which I've already been picking on this, and I'm going to keep picking on it to cause it to bush out. And what I do is, like, if I'm going to come pick basil, I'll pick it right here because this is growing some new leaves, and I'll pick it right above these 2 new leaves, and that'll cause this plant to bush out more so it doesn't get super tall and skinny. Every year I have a favorite spot in my garden. Just one little place that, I don't know, just like moves my heart. It's beautiful. It's got plants that I'm really excited about. And this year, like, the one place that I can stand and look at my garden, my favorite spot is right here. I love this spot and this view. This is my favorite right here. Here are, on the end of this tomato row, now these are the painted ladies, and as you can see, a lot of their variegation faded with the full sun, but the tomatoes themselves are really neat looking. Look at these. I'm super excited for these to come ripe so I can taste them. Here is my variegated rosemary, which actually Rick sent this to me, a viewer that has sent me a few awesome herbs, and he has been bit by the variegated bug too, apparently longer than me, because he knows a lot more about it than I do. And he was telling me that whenever you've got like a variegated herb like this, if you have parts of the plant that come in unvariegated, to pinch those off. And he was explaining how it has to do with the chlorophyll of the plant, and as you can see on this rosemary here, it's definitely putting off some sprigs that are not variegated, and if you don't pinch those off, you're basically in danger of those kind of taking over the plant, because they'll be stronger than the variegated ones. Now, as you can see, these are still here. I haven't picked them off, but that's just because I haven't had need of them in the kitchen. I'm meal planning today, and so I'm going to plan some things where I can use this rosemary, and that way I can come pick it off this week. I can use it. If I didn't have need of it fresh, I could just pick this off and hang it up and dry it. But I definitely want to preserve the beauty of this plant. I mean, look at that. Isn't that not really neat? It's called gold dust if you're looking for it anywhere. It's gold dust rosemary, and it is a really neat variegated plant. Here are the tomatillos that Daniel brought me back from Alabama, growing large. They'll need some sort of staking. And this zinnia patch, which is my favorite, Natalie sowed these when she was here, and this is a mix of the queen lime seeds from Baker Creek, like the queen lime red heart, queen lime orange. Isn't that just such a beautiful mix? I love this. This is the patch of flowers that made me realize how much I love zinnias. These are Thai soldier beans, and I'm gonna put a TP in here because they're getting some short little runners. They're more of a bush type. They're not a trellis type bean, but I am gonna give them a little bit of support. The Greenstalk with tomatoes and peppers is looking really cool. Got little babies in here. This is my one Big Daddy sunflower that's taller than me. It's the Titan variety of sunflower, and that's going to look really neat. And here the blue butterfly peas are coming up and starting to climb. And then this bean trellis. Let's talk about this bean trellis. I don't move my trellises around for the most part. They stay put. I can move them, and we have reconfigured the garden, but like for the most part, the garden is as it was in the fall. And in the fall, on this bean trellis, I sowed scarlet runner beans because they don't do well in the heat here. And so I had sowed them last spring, and they'd come on really nicely. They'd produce some beans, but then the heat zapped them. I didn't get very much from it. And in the fall, some of them grew, but they came in kind of spotty, and I didn't think anything of it. And this spring I came in, I was like, I want to plant noodle beans on this trellis right here in the front of the garden because it's going to be so beautiful with those hanging down. I love noodle beans. And I did. I sowed noodle beans on the trellis. Now, noodle beans are unmistakable from scarlet runner beans. Like, if you have a dry scarlet runner bean, you are not going to mistake it from a dry noodle bean. So I'm quite certain that what has happened on this trellis is not a case of mixed up seeds. That happens. There are times that like seed companies will mess up and something will get mislabeled. I've had that happen. If you get your seeds from a swap, you know, they could be mislabeled. But in the case of this trellis, it is definitely a case of seeds like overwintering dormant and then coming up in the spring. Now, in the natural order of things, a plant grows and it drops its seed. And if it drops its seed at the end of the year, that seed can stay dormant in the ground for months until the spring comes back. And the warmth tells that seed, hey, it's time to grow again. It's our season again. This is why I don't stress out too terribly bad about making sure that you get things planted at the exact right depth, or, you know, the exact right time, or whatever. Like, I'm pretty casual about how I sow seeds, because every year I have to pick out tons of tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and flowers and herbs out of the garden that resowed themselves. So to me, it's like, well, why do I need to stress out about getting everything right? Because they sure as heck didn't know that they weren't sowed correctly. So on my noodle bean trellis here, I came in and I sowed noodle beans. And I do recall that when these popped up, I thought, that was really quick. Like, these came up really fast because they were just bean sprouts. And of course, bean sprouts are all gonna look the same. And when they came up with red blossoms, I thought, well, that's interesting. I don't really remember noodle beans having red blossoms, but you know, I forget things. I could have forgotten that. I'm like, well, you know, the noodle beans I planted last year, maybe it was just a different thing. I don't know. And so I'm just like, whatever. But then I was noticing that this side of the trellis was covered in blossoms, and this side of the trellis didn't have any blossoms. And I was like, what is going on? And of course, I'm not catching on at this point at what's happened. I'm thinking, is it the sun? Like, is this side getting more sun? But the sun comes up here and it comes right over. I'm like, I don't know. This is really weird. And then they set their beans. They start setting beans. And when they set the baby beans, I thought, that really doesn't look like a noodle bean. And then they started to grow. And then I was just like, these are Scarlet runner beans that I sowed in the fall. And yeah, that's not a noodle bean. Those are definitely Scarlet runner beans. Now, there are noodle beans on this trellis, and now that I know, I can tell the difference. This is a Scarlet runner bean, and this is a noodle bean. Very slight difference, but noodle beans' leaves are just a little bit darker. And on this side, there were no Scarlet runner beans. I think I had only planted them on one side of the trellis. And so this side, these are actually all noodle beans. And you can see their blossoms are quite different. Yeah, so there goes my plans for this being totally majestic with noodle beans hanging down all over. Now, there will be some, because these are going to come up. And I'm going to just let them come up crowded, because I think these Scarlet runner beans may die off when it gets really, really hot. And then the noodle beans will prevail. But until then, I'll have this kind of oddly disproportionate trellis with Scarlet runner beans on one side and noodle beans on the other. There's Sweet Maya and Ben Turn, getting ready for our new animals, working hard today. Y'all say hi.
How's it going?
What's up? So he's growing the mustache to try to throw people off.
This is my competition mustache.
You have a competition mustache?
Yeah.
What's it?
Every time I compete martial arts, I do a mustache.
Fantastic.
We're about to go start an ant civil war.
An anthill war? Oh, okay, cool. So we were actually given a tip from our viewers to get rid of ants organically, that you can take a scoop of one anthill and put it on the other, and then a scoop of that one and put it back on the first, and essentially create like an ant war, and they knock each other out. That has actually worked better than anything else that we've tried. So they're going to start an ant war over in the yard where there's some ant piles.
Apocalypse is upon them.
Oh my gosh. This kale is still kicking, much to my surprise. I did not expect to have it this long, but I'm happy to have it. I mean, as you can see, we've still been picking off of it really regularly. I'll probably pick some more today. Here is chamomile, doing really well. Now this is my volunteer tomato plant and my volunteer ground cherry. This plant's getting huge. Volunteers are so strong. That's why I really like to leave volunteers when they grow in a place that I'm okay with them being, because they are always the strongest plants. But I mean, again, their seeds are kind of like survivors. They last throughout the whole winter. And this tomato plant is actually going to be my little experimental plant this year. And I usually do this. I usually let one completely go. And do not prune it at all, just so I can show how they grow. And that's what I'm going to do with this one. And you can see, I mean, it's just like a massive bush, and that is going to end up coming down and over. The only reason I'm going to prune this is I might prune this side, because these are dahlias and I really want them. Ooh, it's getting bright just in the right time too. I'm almost done. We re-sowed all these spaces that are open. And actually here, this 1,000 head kale, which I'm still steadily picking on, and down here, this broccoli. I don't expect these to last a whole lot longer because they are cooler weather crops. And so I actually went underneath these plants and popped some seeds in the ground so that whenever I need to take these out, I'll just cut them off at the ground. And that way there's something already coming up there. Well, that's it for today. We've seen most of the garden. I think we missed probably a few things here and there, but we'll see them next week. At this point, things are going to change really drastically every week. A week is a large amount of time for a garden this time of year. Again, I know I've said it before, and this will not be the last time I said it. I love sharing this with you. It is just such a cool thing to get to grow a garden and have so many cheerleaders. Thank you so much. And thank you for hanging out with me today. God bless you. Until next time.